We're going to continue on with our series called Decoding Communication. We've been dealing with one of the greatest mysteries in the world, and that is that mystery of decoding communication between a man and a woman, between a husband and a wife, especially in the marriage relationship. We've been discussing about how God has given us a key to unlock our communication problems. In fact, sessions 3 through 5, we were focusing on how a wife can better understand her husband, and how a wife can energize and motivate her husband by learning to speak his language, and also by understanding what's going on in his head and why he maybe says some of the things he says and why he reacts the way he does in different situations. Well, as I said, this is going to be fair and balanced reporting, so now we're going to do the other side of the story. So some of you guys are going to say, boy, this is one-sided. Well, that's what the ladies thought about the last several sessions. In fact, the last session was called Understanding the Mind of a Woman, and if you missed that, you definitely want to get this whole series, or you want to get that one program and watch it, because it'll be very helpful for you, because we laid the groundwork of what is going to be shared in this presentation and in the next presentation. Well, now we want to talk to you men about motivating your wives by learning to speak their language, and that language is the language of love. Now I can hear some of you already, some of you guys is like, you know, I'm a guy so I can relate. Oh brother, here we go again with some more of this love stuff. Well, let's review something about all this love stuff, okay? For the last 20 years, our culture is focused on love as the remedy to all relationship problems, and there's several reasons for this. And because of this is why a lot of men who do not want to go to counseling, and they don't want to read books dealing with relationships, because the greatest clientele of people who buy books dealing with relationships, or the greatest number of people who want to go and get counseling, are usually women. And I want to share with you that in the marketing strategy of publishing books, people know, the publishers know, that it's predominantly women who buy these kind of books on relationships. And so those books have been always written from a female perspective. And in that whole concept of the feminist mentality of relationships, usually it always points the finger at the guy, saying that he's the problem, and that he's the one that needs to learn to love his wife better, and if he learns to love his wife better, that, you know, everything is going to go better. And so a lot of men have gun-shied away from all these things like counseling and books, because they feel like they're just going to get beat up. And that's why we had the last previous sessions that were dealing with wives towards men, is to try to bring a balance to this, to show that a wife has a responsibility in respecting her husband. You know, on the other hand, in society, while on one hand we have this kind of like radical feminism and women's superiority kind of thing that's going on the other hand, we have men that oftentimes abuse their authority. They're choleric, they're controllers, and even Christian men who use certain Bible verses to control and manipulate their wives. And I want to share with you, both sides are out of balance. And in this series, I'm hoping that somehow we're going to be able to bring balance to this. Now, I shared in a previous session that, you know, men speak a language of their own. You know, men speak a Slavic, they speak German. And the women oftentimes speak of romantic languages. You know, the women speak the French, they speak the Italiano, you know, they speak the romantic languages. And the fact that men and women process and speak kind of a little bit differently doesn't mean that one is right and one is wrong. It just basically means it's different. And God wants to help us to bring that balance, that decodes for us these weak links in our marriage relationships, in our male and female communication. You know, the text in Ephesians 5 uses one of the most powerful cross parallels in revealing the powerful truth about Christ and the church, and side by side, parallel to that, the relationship between the husband and the wife. And I just want to read to you these verses again. We've been referring back to these verses over and over through this series. But it says, "Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it. So ought men to love their wives as their own bodies." Now, stop and think about this for a second. Now, is this saying that you guys are so egotistical that we know that you love yourself, that you need to at least love your wife as much as you love yourself? No, that's not what this verse is saying. What it's saying is that as you look at Scripture, that a husband should marry his wife and the two should become what? One flesh. And as the two become one flesh, that a husband should love himself and his wife because they are one. And so a man will love his own wife as his own body because the two of them are one. It's a beautiful truth. It goes on to say that he that loveth his wife loveth himself, you see, because the two have become one. For no man has ever hated his own flesh, but nourisheth and cherisheth it, even as the Lord the church. This is so powerful. And it goes on to say, for this cause shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall be joined unto his wife, and the two shall be one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let every one of you in particular so love his wife even as himself. And what? The wife see that she reverence or respect her husbands. Ephesians chapter 5, verses 25 through 33. I really like what it says in the Phillips translation. He really takes the one section there and he breaks it down really practically. He says, in practice, what I have said amounts to this. Let every one of you who is a husband love his wife as he loves himself, and let the wife respect her husband. Now, women are commanded to respect, and I brought this out in the last several sessions on the sessions dealing with understanding the mind of a man and speaking the language of respect, that a wife or a woman is commanded to respect their husbands. Why? Because that is something that just does not come naturally to a woman. So the Lord understands us. He made us. He engineered us, and He understands our strong points and our weak points. And He's saying to the women, I command you in love to respect your husbands. And you guys, on the same side of the token, men are commanded to love their wives because why? It doesn't come natural to us as men. And so God says you need to love your wives. And Ephesians chapter 5 is this really unique and beautiful motif between Christ and the church. A wife should look up to and respect her husband even as the church should to Christ. And the husband should love and die for his wife as did Christ. Because why? The church was the apple of his eye. It was his supreme regard. And that's the way it should be in a husband and wife relationship, that the husband should have the wife be his supreme regard. And Christ did not lord over his church. What was he? He was a servant. He called them his friends. He said, ye all are brethren, or showing equality in a family sense. And that shows that as a husband, that we are not to lord over our wives or our families, but we are to be called servants, that they should be our friends, that they should be our brethren in a sense of equality in a family sense. And so men who take some of these scriptures and they twist it for their own manipulative purposes are taking it completely out of context, because it's showing love and balance and equality. Husbands are not to be lords or kings. They are to be the spiritual guardians of the family. And it goes on to say that the two shall become one flesh, to reflect the character of God in a more and full and complete way that they cannot individually. Now, some of you are saying, well, look, I'm single, my husband left me, or I'm not married. How does that apply to me? Well, basically, a person, an individual, can reflect God's glory. When the Holy Spirit's dwelling in them and they have surrendered their life to Christ, God can start to reveal Himself through them. But in a unique and special way, God has made the union, this mystical union between a man and a wife in a marriage relationship. And that is why it says right in the book of Genesis that it's not good that man should be alone, and that God made a helpmeet for man, and that the two shall become one. See, Christ nurtures and looks over His church. And so should a husband, a wife, and his family. I love this Bible verse. In Colossians 3:19 it says, husbands, agape love your wives, and be not bitter against them. How many guys are bitter against their wives? They hold on to petty hurt feelings. They start cold wars in the home, and they won't talk to their wives. They get upset about things, and they like we talked about, they compartmentalize things in their thinking, and they start to shut their wife out. And it says, husbands, love your wife, agape love your wives, and be not bitter against them. And it's interesting, through the whole scriptures, there's no place where a wife, as I pointed out in some of the previous sessions, where a wife is commanded to agape love her husband. But a husband is commanded by God to agape love his wife, because God knows that doesn't come natural to us men. It goes on to say, Ephesians 5, verse 25, it says, husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and did what? Gave himself for it. Again, in 1 Peter 3:7, it says, likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them in other words, with your wife, according to knowledge or understanding, giving honor unto them. This is saying, husbands, dwell with them, your wife, according to knowledge, in other words, with understanding, giving honor or esteem, holding them up in the highest degree is really what the original translation is saying here. Hold your wife up to the highest degree. Honor her. Christ esteems the church. It's the apple of his eye. It's the item of his supreme regard. And that's the way a husband should be to his wife. Now, God commanded men to love their wives. And, us guys, we kind of tend to think of things kind of like from a sports perspective or something. To us, it's maybe the 50-50 plan. If my wife comes up to the 45% mark, I'll come up to the 45% mark. But till I see some changes here, I'm only going to come to the 25%, and then she's going to have to come up to 35% before I move to the 40%. And I want to just tell you guys, that is not God's plan. It's not God's plan that it should be the 50-50 plan, a business deal of some sort, but it should be the 150 plan. We should give 150% to our relationship with our wives. Both of us should be on the same team, and we should run all the way to the infield, all the way down to the goalie, and give 150%. This business relationship that so oftentimes comes up in a relationship between a husband and wife is just wrong. It's not found in the scriptures. And I just want to share, men, you need to step up the plate and be men. I'm just going to talk from my own heart, my own experience. I know how us guys can be. Men are really just little boys and older bodies, okay? They often say that the only difference between men and boys are the size of the toys. Well, it's also true that men are just little boys and big and older bodies, and we pout like little boys. We hold on to grudges. We can be so stubborn at times, and that stubbornness can stop us from being able to mend our relationships with our spouse. We need to come to a point in our lives that we recognize that there's crazy cycles going on in our relationship, and step up to the plate and be willing to put a stop to it. Now I want to share with you what I refer to as the leave and cleave passage in the scriptures. It's found in Genesis 2:24. It says, "Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh." Husbands commanded to leave and to cleave. And this is such an interesting word, because this word cleave literally means to cling or to adhere like glue. Now, why is this given? Why is this command given? Because I'll tell you why. Because it's God's design that a man should leave his mother and his father and should stick together like glue with his wife. Why? Because the Lord knows that the wife wants and desperately needs closeness in their relationship. In the Old Testament, when Leah was talking about her desire to have Jacob love her more, she says, "Now this time will my husband be joined unto me," Genesis 29:34. Here's the word join. She's saying, I want my husband to be attached to me. I want him to be cleaving to me, to be glued to me. Leah said, after bearing 6 sons for Jacob, finally she said, "Now will my husband dwell with me," Genesis chapter 30, verse 20. See, it's a woman's desire that the husband be close, because a wife needs emotional closeness in her relationship with her husband. In Song of Solomon 8:3, it says, "His left hand should be under my head, and his right hand should embrace me." So in Song of Solomon chapter 3, verse 4, it says, "I found him whom my soul loveth. I held him and would not let him go." You see, the wife's desire is for closeness, both for physical as well as for emotional and spiritual closeness. The essence of masculinity is initiation, and the essence of femininity is response. Now, oftentimes a man will like it when a wife initiates. That makes him feel good. It feels wanted. He has emotional insecurities too. But generally speaking, in the male-female world, masculinity is the essence of initiation, and femininity is the response to that initiation. Most women want and need closeness. Now, there are exceptions to the rule. Sometimes maybe a lady, when she was younger, she was sexually or physically abused, and she's got some emotional issues where she doesn't want to have her husband close. It could be that too, that there's some bad things that have gone on in their relationship, and so she pushes her husband away because there's been offenses and barriers built up, and so she just finally just can't deal with the emotional hurt, so she closes off her husband. And so there's these issues that go on, and sometimes people need to go to a good pastor or somebody and counsel with them. But there's something interesting about this whole thing about boys and girls and men and women, and this whole thing about needing closeness. And they did this study. It was just, to me, it was really intriguing. They took 2 boys and 2 girls of different age groups that were best of friends. They took 2 6-year-old boys and they put them in a room where there was just 2 chairs and a video camera was videotaping them, and there was nothing else in the room. And the 2 boys went in there, and they never sat in the